So we'll give them about 3 minutes before we get started. Thank you, Teresa, for joining. I just see you logged on. Thank you.
Yes, I'm really excited. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I don't have my camera on because I was at the gym, and you know, girl.
I know how it is.
If I'm not looking fly like you, I'm not turning my camera on. I'm just putting that out there.
That's all right. That's all right. We're just giving folks time to come into the room. Thank you, Matt, for joining. Kalia, I hope I pronounced your name right. Thank you for joining. Dr. Sharon Gaines, thank you for joining. Rain, Anthony Gaines, thank you for joining. Tatiana Nasa, thank you for joining. We're just giving folks a few minutes to come into the room before we get started. Thank you, Mackenzie Council, for joining. A future educator. We'll give it one more minute or so before we get started. Khadijah, thank you for joining. We're giving folks a few minutes to pile in before we get our dialogue going. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Let's get started. And folks will join as they can. So this discussion initiated based on some of the posts that I had put on LinkedIn and Instagram over the last couple of weeks and maybe even months at this point. And so, as many of you may know, at this stage of my career, I decided that I was going to pursue my doctorate of education at Baylor University. And it became very apparent to me based on some of my experiences as an adult student that there still is this lack of cultural relevant understanding of how you engage students of color, me being one of them. And so as an adult going through that experience, of course, I started thinking, wow, well, if I'm going through it and my colleagues are going through it, then I can just imagine how younger children are feeling but can't articulate it, and they don't have the vernacular or the understanding to be able to share what they're feeling, what they're thinking. So they just kind of chalk it up to, my teacher doesn't like me, right? And so there's a huge opportunity for us as a community, as a society, to understand how important it is that there is this cultural alignment between the educators that are delivering information to our children and our children as they receive it. And so that brought about this post. And there was a lot of dialogue that came as a result of that, which then told me that there's a need for this discussion, so that parents are armed, community members are armed, caregivers are armed, educators are armed to have these kinds of discussions. And so this discussion is an hour long. The discussion component of it will be about 40 minutes, and then we'll have the opportunity for Q&A. You can put your questions in the chat room, and we have our amazing partner who partners with us at Brainy HR Solutions, who is going to field some of those questions so that we can answer them. The goal is to make sure that you're armed with the information that you need in order to ensure that your child has a positive educational experience. And so as we start this conversation, I want to introduce my two panelists, both of whom are educators in their own right, and they are working really hard to make a difference in the lives of our children. So I'm going to hand it over to both of them so that they can introduce themselves and share a little bit about the work that they do and the impact that they're making. So let's start with Candace. Candace, you want to introduce yourself to our attendees?
I sure can, certainly. So I'm first down here in Houston, Texas. So anybody in the Texas area, welcome. I am also, like I said, a colleague and dear friend with Serene. We have been studying together now for 2.5 years at Baylor University, working on our doctorates. My doctorate is going to be in education, of course, and my problem of practice is about measuring discrimination perception among middle grade students, pre and post anti-bias education with a discrimination perception survey. That's a lot of words for pretty much saying that the kids are going to be, I guess, asked questions about how they feel about their school environment, go through anti-bias education, something such as no place for hate. And then after that, take that survey. And again, this is not just going to be kids of color, but all students, so that we can see who is really affected in learning by these things. I also work for a very large school district, third largest school district in Texas, at Cypress Fairbanks as an instructional coach. I've run the middle schools here, mainly Title I. So these are your underserved community that have typically been redlined into these schools, of course, and put in schools that sometimes don't have a lot of resources. And so it's my job, of course, to support and be there for these students and to figure out how we can get good science education into the classrooms. And so that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Candace. Jennifer?
Hey everybody, my name is Jen Harrison. I am in Charlotte, North Carolina. I know Serene from a little lass on this panel here. I worked with Serene's daughter when she was in 2nd grade, and she didn't need me, trust me. She just, wanted to get the A+ rather than the A. So, but I just spent a lot of time. I think Serene, I was supposed to leave your house, Serene and I would just get in these conversations, and I would leave feeling truly I felt filled, because conversations are hard. And I just always felt safe with Serene. And I think that is important, but I think also learning how to have the conversations has been huge. And those conversations and that learning that I've done over the last several years, and I'm no means an expert, of course, not even close, has really helped me to see how I do things in my school and in my role. I serve as a multi-class leader in our local school district. We are like 18th largest in the country. Charlotte's booming, and we have about 147,000 students. So I've worked closely in central office. I'm now back in a school, and I serve in a Title I school in the red line section of Charlotte. So it's exactly as Candace mentioned. And I serve children whose parents went to our school. So with that being said, not much has changed in the area or the school. And I find that unfair, unjust, wrong and not something that we want to be proud of. I want the children in my school, the expectations from their parents should be what children expect from the school my children went to. So that's really what drives me, is serving these children and letting them know, helping them to believe in themselves, that they are powerful and they have just exponential, opportunities laying ahead for them. So I hope that gave a good idea of me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Jennifer. And so as we start to talk about, quality of education, recognizing that in this country, there is a tremendous level of disparity that is based on socioeconomic status, right? Access, who can afford the school, that has the resources. But even when there is limited access, there's an opportunity for us as parents and educators and community members to walk in armed with a baseline expectation of what we expect from the school districts and how this information is distributed to our students. And so therein goes the topic of culturally relevant pedagogy. It is absolutely a mouthful. So in the educational sector, we call it CRP. And so that's like an acronym you can become a little more familiar with. But, I'm going to go to one of my panelists so that they can explain exactly what culturally relevant pedagogy is. And the other part to that question is, why is it important?
So I can start with that since it's kind of my works for years. So culturally relevant pedagogy. So when you think of the word pedagogy, you're thinking about children. Okay, there's andragogy and there's pedagogy. Andragogy is adult learning, and pedagogy is you're thinking about everybody 17, 18 and under pretty much. And so cultural relevance is making things fit into the lens that a student could understand. So when you're thinking about culturally relevant pedagogy and you're putting those together, it's not necessarily a list of things that you can do. It's not boxes that you can check off. It's not something that we're going to have to add on to our teaching. That's extra work that you have to add into your lesson plans. Culturally relevant pedagogy is how you think about what you're doing. It's a thought process. Are you aware of the students that are in your classroom? Are you aware that recently students went through Ramadan? Are you aware of that? Are you aware that today is Malcolm X Day in America? Okay, these are things that a lot of our students are not aware of. And because things like this are not just being stated in the classroom every day, like the warm up, the day of the week, we celebrate George Washington and President's Day. It is not giving a Black History Month program, a Native American History Month program. Culturally relevant pedagogy is thinking about the population of students that you have there, and are you serving them so that they see themselves in the lessons that you're teaching?
Excellent. Jennifer, you want to add to that?
I just wanted to add, I really appreciate, Candace, that you said it isn't part of a lesson plan. And I've actually seen that sometimes. People will go, what am I doing to make this culturally relevant? It's how you think. And it is so how you think, Candace. So when you think about the books you're choosing to use as mentor texts, do they look like the children in your classroom? But on a flip side of that, if you have a completely group of white children, is everything you're giving them only characters who are white? Because that isn't culturally relevant either when that's all they're seeing. That's not teaching them to have that mindset and that view. So I really think it's just a habitual way you think. How am I recognizing the identities, the cultures, the religions and the languages of the kids in my room, but also the ones not in my room, so that I'm bringing that culture into the world, or into the room, excuse me. Does that make sense?
Definitely. And to add to that, a lot of, just to answer the second part of what makes this so important for parents and students, Just to tell a small story, I had a young girl, African-American student, that literally was having a hard time just fitting in, was at a school that was predominantly white. Completely understand that sometimes we get put in those situations. And I had literally been mentoring this young girl. And so one day she comes up to me and she's just really down. And I'm like, you need to hold your head up. And she's like, I don't see the reason as to why. And I'm just like, you come from a land of kings and queens. You need to carry yourself as such. And a lot of these students don't know that. They are learning about themselves for the very first time as if we landed here in 1619 and that's all we were. And we were not. A lot of students are getting the tourist view of what it is about other cultures. You cannot have a cultural day with a table and decorations and outfits and expect students to feel as if they are relevant in that school. Okay, these are not things that you can do that obviously are going to make anybody feel as if they're important. And so why is it important for parents and students is because your students are coming home and they don't feel like they belong and they don't know how to tell you this. They're saying that they're not Black enough or they're not white enough or they're not Hispanic enough, and they don't even know the definition of who they are because what they're learning a lot of the times is from their teachers and other educators. They're learning from music videos and from other things that are defining who they are instead of taking a step back and really getting that true history, really understanding where they come from. And a lot of it is just when you know where you come from, you have a lot more just different ways that you carry yourself in this world.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the other part is there is a condensed narrative and a very curated narrative of history in education today. And, what I found really ironic is, my mother says that we're for doctoral students, we're in the 25th grade, right? But what I find really ironic is that you can go through K through 12 into college and never, ever hear anything about the BIPOC community and the contributions that they've made to the US that we all enjoy, or not, some of us not so much because of the stories that are not being told. And so, to share another story on how impactful this is and how important it is for us as parents to ensure that we understand the context and the goal of some of the lessons and even some of the trips that our students are going on. I'll give you a really quick story. So, at home, you receive the permission slip, right, for your child to go on this trip. And, at this time, Mackenzie, I believe, was in the second grade or so. And I received the permission trip. I'm really excited. She's going to Winston-Salem. And, because I was the class parent, because I like to do the most, I'm the class parent, I was privileged to go on this trip. And so we go to the trip, and I'll give you the condensed version, but we go on this trip, and the entire narrative that was taught to these students was about slavery and the singular contribution of slavery in this town of Winston-Salem. And so when you look at the population of parents and students that were in the room, you saw the children of color whose heads were hung low. My daughter was really emotional about it. And there was this level of pride for non-children of color. I was furious, obviously, because in my mind, I give my child to you, I entrust my child to you to give them a full experience. But in that moment, you diminished who she is. And you shared this very condensed narrative that is damaging and it's incomplete. And so when we think about our role as parents and our need to push the envelope to ask questions, you receive that permission slip. Where are they going? What's the goal of this trip? What are they going to learn in this situation? And what are they going to be exposed to? And the teachers should be able to answer that question. Jen?
I was just going to kind of add in just an academic mindset that will be born from experiences like that, besides, you know, identity mindset and that sort of thing. But all of that is a microaggression right there. Intended, not intended. And we as humans, what do we remember? We remember the negative. That is truly in our animal, right? That's what we do. So if you are a small child and you don't have a mom or a dad or someone else advocating, knowing what's going on in a certain situation with a microaggression, such as that field trip, that child is left with that. And that has a very impactful, it could have a long-term impact on their academic mindset and just their belief in themselves. There will be no agency for that little guy or girl until someone helps work through what just occurred, or, you know. So I think that's also something to really think about, is every step we make, a student's going to remember in one way or the other, and it's going to impact them going forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so when we think about our role as educators, you know, what are some of the opportunities for educators to advance culturally relevant pedagogy? And Candace was fantastic in opening up the dialogue around what a culturally responsive educator is, what that looks like. But let's also talk about the opportunities for educators to act in a culturally responsive way. And what are some of the examples of an educator being culturally responsive?
Are we allowed to speak out? Wait, I can't even hear.
Serene, can you hear us?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. So the attendees right now are on mute for the panelists, and at the end we're going to answer some questions and have a little more engagement.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay, Dr. How do I pronounce
It's
your
Dr.
last name?
Sivers.
Thank you, Dr. Sivers. Thank you for being here.
Awesome. So just opportunities for educators to advance culturally relevant pedagogy. One, there's resources that are out there. A Google search will give you a lot of hits instantly if you're just looking for something really quick, really easy. But to get to the depths of it, honestly, is you're going to have to go to your education system. So here in Texas, we call it the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. We actually have a curriculum that is written for African-American students. And so what you could do is look to see is if your district or the entities that be have curriculum that are written that are already going to help discuss culture within the classroom. I would start there first, because at the end of the day, there may be opportunities. You might have a diversity and inclusion officer, things of that nature that may not even know they've gotten the position, but they may not know that it's not just checking a box. Another way to advance it is just of how to become a culturally responsive educator. You have got to do the work to see the students in your room. You cannot assume anything. You cannot. You do not know where these students are coming from, what things they're seeing. For example, you think about the George Floyd incident, the murder of George Floyd, to be more correct. How many times that video was played on the internet? How many times students had to watch something like that happen? And then how many times here in my own state did I see students mimicking that because they thought it was funny? So it starts in several places. It starts at home, but as educators, we honestly have the students a lot longer than their parents do. And it is our job and it's our sworn duty to give these students the education that they are entitled to. That is something that we all signed on our contracts. It's something that we all agreed to. And to be an educator means that you are willing to do the work that it takes to recognize your students in your classroom.
Can I add on to that? To add on to what Candace was saying about do the work, I really appreciate that, Candace. And I think that before, there's something that even has to happen before you have culturally relevant pedagogy. You have to be culturally competent. You have to go through that work. And I will say that I've done some of that work, and it's really hard, and it should be hard, and it should be harder for me than it should be for the women and men of color in the classes or the book clubs that I'm in. It should be harder for me. And that's my opinion, but I think I'm the one who has to do a lot of learning and unlearning. And if I don't understand my implicit bias or my explicit bias, I don't understand what culture I'm coming from and what my roots are and what attitudes I've learned that I don't even realize that could be seen as microaggressions that are racist. If I haven't even done that work to know myself, then how am I going to be credible in celebrating the cultures of the children in the room? And also, it's not going to come as easily if I haven't done that work. So I do think that before, this is about pedagogy, but that work also needs to happen. And there are many opportunities. Here in Charlotte, we have some places you can go for a dismantling racism course or, cultural proficiency courses. These are happening in lots of places. And if they aren't happening in your school district or in your son or daughter's school or in your school where you work, I think that it is our job to be the champion to say, what do I have to do to get that work here? If it's even just have a book club and read a book or something, building the trust to have that communication. But I think that has to happen first. It's going to change so much in such a broader sense than just the classroom that you're teaching in.
I agree. Exceptional point. And I also think that it's important for us not to assume that because you have a teacher of color, that teacher is culturally competent, right? There may be some unifying experiences that may make them a bit more understanding. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are culturally competent, nor that they understand, what culturally relevant pedagogy is or how to be culturally responsive. Because remember, when we're talking about cultural relevancy and we talk about diversity as a whole, right? Because that's what this discussion is about, right? It's about being able to engage diverse students from the entire diaspora of diversity in a way that is meaningful and in a way that connects them to the educator, right? So there's a level of sensitivity and a level of understanding. So when we think about culture, yes, we think about ability and capability. Really, really important, because we have students who, and we'll talk about this in another part of our series, but we have students who are on varying degrees of understanding of content or how they learn, and their capabilities are different. And so how do we then engage those students? How do we meet them where they are? And we can't take for granted that a teacher understands how to do that. But what we're finding is that when there isn't this connection to the culture and the various cultures, that it is very easy to put a label on a child that does not belong. And that is the part that starts to change the path of their academic experience, which is unfair, unwarranted, and can be prevented. And so that's why we're here, right? Because we want to be able to then have that discussion. And so one of the questions that one of the folks that I engage with said to me, they said, hey, Serene, but how do I even have that conversation? What do I even say to an educator that engages them to have this kind of discourse with me? And so what I'd like to ask from our panelists, how do you, as a parent, as a caregiver, how do you then approach the educator, the, you know, and it doesn't even have to be in school. It can be in the camp, right? It can be in a literacy program, right? It can be at the in tennis classes, you know, or basketball. But the reality is that you cannot engage all students the same way. And so what I asked the panelists, how do you, as a parent who is still getting comfortable, right, with this language, how do we approach our teachers and our educators to ensure that our children are having the best experience and experiences that are relevant to them?
You want to take that, Candace, first, or do you want me to go first? Okay. So I really like this question because it reminded me of a personal story. When I was teaching second grade in 2007, I had a little boy. The school that I was teaching in was predominantly of affluent socioeconomic status, predominantly white students. We also had a lot of Asian students and families here from their country in Asia, and spoke different languages, not all the same, of course. And one of our students, one of my little guys, he was the cutest little button. Oh, his name was Tanvir. And his dad, after about 2 weeks, asked me to have a conference and if he could come in and see me. And I, of course, said, of course. I pride myself on my relationships with family, and Tanvir was a doll. So he came in, and I had not ever interacted with people from the Sikh religion. And the men wear turbans. They do not cut their hair. I did not know why they wore the turbans. I did not know they did not cut their hair. And Dad was coming in to talk to me, to teach me about his culture, and to help me protect his child and love on his child and teach his child to love that turban, because, right, he's taught in his home in our country, which not many people are looking like he was looking. He's taught to love that and cherish it because that's who he is. But then he's going to go to school, like Candace said, for 7.5 hours a day. And it's very possible he's going to be made fun of. He's going to be told that's weird. So now this little 7-year-old is doing that dance between, I don't know who I am, and I don't know if it's good or bad. And so I will never forget that day that he just wanted to teach me so that I would be the best I could be for his child. And I have to tell you, back then, I don't know that I would have reached, we did lots of cultural activities, sure, but I don't know if I would have called up Dad and said, hey, could you explain this to me so I know? So it was so edifying, and it was so wonderful to have that. I had another student, Celine, the exact same year. Her mother called me and said, Celine's going to be cranky during the day for about, it was in May, for the next couple weeks, she's going to be cranky. And of course it was because she didn't eat. And she was, observing Ramadan. And I was asked, can she have a water bottle at her desk? Because she's a child, of course. So it's just things like that as parents, but what happens if they don't feel safe going to their child's teacher? And that's where the relationships are huge. So I understand that was really easy for them because it's me, it's just Ms. Harrison. However, I think that regardless of how approachable a teacher is, it's our job as parents to protect our kids. And protecting our kids might mean edifying their teacher and teaching their teacher something that he or she does not know about the children in her class or his class.
Absolutely. Thank you. Candace, anything to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. So, I understand it's uncomfortable. And that's the only way to grow. I mean, if you really honestly think about it, and I often tell my kids the story of a lobster. And if you don't know this, a lobster gets in his shell. And when he's in his shell, he starts to grow, and it becomes very tight and very, very uncomfortable. And so what he does is he sheds the shell and he has to climb underneath a rock. because that's the only safe place he has, you know. And during this process is new growth and a new shell is forming. But during this time, he's also his most vulnerable. He's his most weak. And only through that vulnerability, only through that dismantling of that harder shell on the outside, is the lobster able to be one of the longest living species in the ocean. I don't know if you can tell I have a science background. But through that process, it's necessary. So it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to feel like you're in a dark place. You're gonna feel nervous, and it's gonna happen. But you cannot fear that, because at the end of the day, what's happening is you're gaining something even better, which is a new outlook on life, and that's your shell. You know, you're gaining a new lens. You're developing ways in which students and other students can come through these classrooms and really feel connected to the learning that's going on in there, because of the fact that they see themselves in education. And so you can, with your English teacher, ask them, are they giving out books that represent different cultures? As a science teacher, have your students draw a picture of a scientist. You'd be surprised. Even the students of color draw a Caucasian male with glasses, okay? That's a way for you to realize that. Close your eyes and picture a scientist yourself. When you picture a mathematician, so what are the things that you're seeing out there in the world that you don't want your kids to believe? And that the world is just one way, you know? So it's definitely those things that you have to internalize, and you just have to be ready, and you're going to go in there armored up, and you're going to dismantle that armor, but you're going to come out and that school's going to be brand new. These kids are going to come through, and it's going to be better in the end. And so I always tell people that, you know, if it doesn't feel okay, then it's not the end. And in the end, everything will be okay.
I agree. And that's eloquently put. Thank you both. And I believe as parents and as educators, we have to commit to being disruptors. You have to. Because the reality is that if we don't, there is no change, right? We recognize that there is an absence of a lot in education, right? And we recognize that there are so many opportunities for us to disrupt. And individually, it becomes very difficult for us to effectuate the change that we need to see in the educational system. But collectively, we are unstoppable. And that is the truth. We have seen that happen. We have seen it. We see it happening today as we speak, which is why discussions like this is so important. And so what I asked to the panelists, so what is a realistic expectation about a teacher's ability to connect culturally to students? You know, because I'm not sure how much of this discussion is happening in the academic space. So if we could start there, I think that might be helpful for everyone.
Definitely. So teachers and students actually, believe it or not, connect on a lot of things. If you're in an impoverished school and you're a teacher and you're making a teacher's salary, you connect with those students a lot more than you think. If you've had nights with ramen noodles only for dinner, those are kids too. They've had nights with only ramen noodles for dinner as well, okay? So we have to realize that we actually connect in a lot more ways than you think. And so really, you almost have to force yourself to find those connections in a way. A lot of the times those students are so used to being sheltered and silenced and not recognized that it's gonna take somebody to say, hey, you know, I like those shoes that you have on. You know, I like that outfit that you're wearing today. You know, start small, but you've got to build relationships. Every day, whenever my students would come into the classroom, I would find something to compliment them about. Because at the end of the day, once they start to feel better about themselves, they're going to start to voice to you the things that they need. And they're not going to trust you unless they feel that they can be safe with you. And so the biggest thing, I mean, I've had some difficult kids, even if it's just been like, I like your shoelaces, because there's some kids that's all you can find. And I get it, you know, they're hard and they can be. It's the end of the year. But at the end of the day, you have to think about just those relationships and just how much more you can get out of those students by recognizing just what they like. You know, if you have students that listen to different music and you play music in your classroom, play different music. You should see how many kids' eyes like just lit up when I decided to play K-pop, because of how many students that I had in the room that loved K-pop. I don't know what the heck is going on with that, but cool, you guys like it, let's jam to it. You know what I mean? So it's just one of those things that you have to be uncomfortable, like I said, with being uncomfortable, bringing in other cultures. Even when I taught history, if I was going to teach a history lesson about some culture that was in my classroom, I asked the students, teach me. Do you guys want to, you know, do that as well? Because we can all, and they brought plates of food and we all got to enjoy. But I also reminded the kids that this isn't the culture in itself. This is just a tourist view. So we have to understand it on a deeper level as well, you know, because there isn't one way to just be a culture. So I think there's just a lot of ways that teachers don't realize they connect with students in a lot more ways than they think.
I agree, Candace. And I think to add to that, I think that it is a fair expectation along with that teacher relating to those kids. And that is a fair expectation that your child's teacher is making a connection. And it shouldn't be a hard effort. And I mean, I understand there are teachers that might be introverted or whatever, but it should be a wanted, a desired thing to have a relationship and know these kids if you are a teacher. And I think you should want to know what's different about them and know, you know, where they live even, what are they coming from? And I think as a parent coming into a classroom, which please, Lord, let us be back in the classroom in the fall. Let parents in. They should walk into the classroom and basically see their child on the walls, see the room looking empowering and welcoming and inclusionary for their inclusive, for their child. I think that right there is also going to open the door for crucial conversations or difficult conversations from both teacher and from parent. So there's the relationship, but there's also the environment. And I just want to add that I get very disappointed when I go into Title I schools, and the schools just, I get very disappointed when they're not pretty and they aren't looking like I have made an effort to really show these children that what they deserve is what everybody deserves. And that is a beautiful building and a beautiful environment. And it may be an old building, but just the environment itself. And that's not a local or a, you know, specific example, but that's teacher effort to make sure that the children in that classroom in that school have pride in that place because they see themselves on those walls and in the hallways and in the classroom.
Absolutely, 100%. And Dr. Gaines made a comment, Dr. Sharon Gaines, thank you for your comment. She said, language barriers are a huge impediment to learning and connecting and engaging. And so I think when we have educators who aren't focused on ensuring that, you know, they're engaging in a culturally relevant way, don't wait for them to come to you, parents. Go to them. Let me talk to you about who my child is, with where you're comfortable, right? You share because there has to be this level of trust that has been established in order for you to share certain information. But even if it's only superficial, it's important that that educator has to view your child as an individual. Really, really, really important. I remember as a child just kind of feeling like I needed to fit in, to blend in to the background. And for me, that was okay because I do the most, right? But there are students who are introverted and students who you got to pull it out. You have to pull it out. And so when the teacher engages that way and mom or dad or auntie or the caregiver engages that way, it ensures that you will not forget about my baby. It ensures that you won't, because I'm going to make sure that you don't. Right? And so that's another really important part. And so another question that we had was from the community. I really want to give the community the opportunity to say something. But you know, there are students who, you know, are not students of color. Do we think as a collective that it is also important for those students to understand different cultures, even if they're not represented, recognizing that a culture is not necessarily attributed to the color of a person's skin? It has a lot to do with their environment and what they were exposed to. So is there anyone who wants to provide, specifically our educators, who wants to provide a little insight on that, on the importance of ensuring that culturally relevant pedagogy is indoctrinated in all learning for all students? You can just take yourself off mute. I think that was a tough one. Okay, so I'm going to throw it to my panel. So Jen, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about all students having this experience of the importance of culturally relevant pedagogy?
I think, I mean, obviously, I think that it should be required. For example, my son, my youngest son, I have 4 boys, and my life's goal is to raise culturally competent, loving, kind to all humans, right? Young men. And our high school has African American studies as an elective. My son will take it. He I'm sure would much rather take weight training, but he knows it is important in our family, and he knows the value of understanding other people, and that's you know, how he's been raised. That class should not be an elective. What that class should be is maybe it needs to be some kind of hybrid between all cultures. I don't know, something with Asian Americans. I don't know what the answer to that is. But when you only offer that as an elective, who's going to probably take that class? It's not going to necessarily broaden the perspectives. And something that I always used to say, I have typically lived as an adult in cities, and I've chosen that, and I want my kids to live in cities. And where I live here in Charlotte, it is a suburb. And at first I struggled, because I would say, I don't want my children growing up in a Wonder Bread bag. And that was just me being sarcastic and silly, but I wanted my kids to be around people that don't necessarily look like them or talk like them or act like them or affiliate the same as they do. So I think that it should be a requirement, and it shouldn't be Black History Month. Oh, so we'll bring out the Black History books and we're going to put them up on the bookshelf, because we're going to highlight those books. And then I'm going to pick them all up and put them back up on my teacher bookshelf. Right? So it should be something that's infused. You know, if I'm reading a novel, I'm going to study that author. And then the next month I might study an author. I might study a African-American author and all the wonderful things he did, because we're going to talk about Walter Dean Myers. And then, oh, what's another author that we know who's like him? Or all of these things should come naturally. And I don't know what the answer is to see that happens, right, globally or across our nation. But I think that every child, whether they are a child of color or not, must have that exposure. And it needs to be continuous. And I will stop talking, but I have to say, a lot of adult friends I have that I've been engaging in conversation with, not so much friends, but just connections or colleagues, it's exposure, right? So we have people in our lives that you're like, how can you think like that? They're not bad people. They have no frame of reference, so they make a decision on something they've never been exposed to, and it's huge. So if we started doing this with children in school, like Candace said, we have them more than their parents do, we could change the dial. But it has to be it has to be global, it has to be required, and it has to start young.
And just to trail off of that, you know, do we want systemic racism to end? Do we want the systems to be dismantled? Do we want it to stop? Do we want to stop seeing people of color dying online? And if the answer to all of that is yes, then that is why every single student should be learning about every single culture in the classroom. The only way to create change is through the system of education. It's the only way. And because the system of education is a system in itself that is oftentimes pipeline to prison, it just is, we've got to change what we're doing. We have got to understand that at the end of the day, if you really want to see this change happening, if you really want to see the system of racism dismantled, if you really want to start to see more people that look like us, more people that look like you or your daughter or your son or your nephew, you know, become the next whoever, president of the United States, of the world, whatever, then you should be requiring this in your school. Because not requiring it means that you are supporting a system of racism. And if you're comfortable with that, then don't require it.
Absolutely. I think you can drop the mic on that one for sure, truly. Cheryl kind of wanted to make a comment to my prior question. Cheryl?
Yeah, Serene, I was just thinking about what your two panelists said about the importance of cultural diversity for all students in the classroom at a very young age. And I go back to my childhood many moons ago, growing up in the Northeast. I was at a predominantly white elementary school, but there was some diversity there. What I really remember is how we celebrated all cultures. When it was St. Patrick's Day, we celebrated. We talked about, you know, the Irish famine. We had celebrations where we had friends and family come in from Mexico and talk about their stories and share food. Black History Month, African-American families talked. Jewish families came in, you know, during, let's say, Hanukkah, and we learned the dreidel song and all that. What that did for me as an individual was it made me not only culturally sophisticated in a way, but it made me comfortable around lots of different people. Even so, just recently, I was in Charlotte and was at dancing school with one of my children, and met a parent there who was also from the Northeast, Jewish. So we were talking and I shared some of her culture with her and we just started laughing. I told her, you know, I said, yes, you know, I had a Jewish big brother who taught me so much. I mean, just the connections you make because you know a little something about someone's culture is priceless. Now, we were doing that way back when, not perfectly, when I was coming up. What happened? Why did we stop that? Fast forward to now, my kids are at a predominantly white elementary school in the North Carolina area, in a rural part of Charlotte, right? Or outside of Charlotte. And they have a big problem with celebrating Black History Month. So what they do every month is they celebrate it as they want it to be Cultural History Month. And I'm offended by that. I'm like, I don't mind celebrating other people's cultures. I want my kids to learn about all other cultures. But what is so bad? What hurts you so bad that you can't acknowledge 1 month for Black History Month? They shy away from it. And I think that they do kids a disservice by doing that and not celebrating all cultures. And that's just my 2 cents. Just wanted to add that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cheryl. 100%.
Can I jump in for a moment?
Please do.
So
Please
I
do.
am a school leader for New York City Department of Education. And so this whole cultural relevant pedagogy are the buzzwords now within the DOE. And for some people, it's just that. It's a buzzword. But I think it all boils down to inclusivity. And that in itself encompasses so many different areas. I mean, inclusive with regards to their status, inclusive with regards to their academic setting, be it special ed or an L student, inclusivity with regards to whether or not they're in a gifted program. And then New York City in itself, are you in a school in a more predominant or a more socially economic affluent neighborhood, because those kids are afforded a lot more. So it's a disparity within the entire system. And so as a school leader, on my part, I think it begins with us. I think it begins with the tone that we set in the building, because we can't expect our teachers to have that expectation if we don't. I say, and part of that on the role of the school leader is having those difficult conversations with your staff, having those book studies, being able to do what we do in my building, which is restorative circles, where we pose these questions amongst our staffs first, and allow them to share openly their own cultures, because oftentimes they'll comment and say, wow, I never knew you did this, or wow, I didn't even know that happens there. And so sometimes sometimes it's for a lack of knowledge. And then other times it's just people simply ignoring it because they don't want to face the elephant in the room. So some examples of how we do it, and just giving a most recent example, we have a large Muslim population in my building. And so it was important that I let all of the teachers know that Ramadan is occurring and that we're going to have students who are fasting. And I'm in elementary, and even in elementary. And so it's important that you understand that they may come in a little cranky. Their behaviors may change as a result of not eating, but you need to know this beforehand. So sending out that newsletter to all of the staff, whether they have a Muslim in their class or not, you may encounter them in the hallway, but just being sensitive of their culture. And those are the type of conversations that need to occur top down rather than bottom up. And I'll just leave it there because I can go on and on.
We love it. We love it. We love it, because that's what this dialogue is about. It's about being able to walk away and understand what happens beyond the veil, right? Because many parents don't know, they don't understand it. And that's really important. And so I'll throw it out to my panelists as well as the educators, because I think it's important that we put a pin in something. How much influence do you really think you have in order to inform how and what your child, your niece, your nephew is being taught? How much influence do you think you have as a parent to inform that? Educators?
So on the public school level, parents have a whole lot of influence, but they have lack of knowledge that they even have that influence, especially in some of those low socioeconomic areas. And so again, I have a son who attends a gifted program in a very affluent neighborhood, and the things that he is afforded, the PTA, the staff, is totally different than that where I work, which is in the Bronx, which is in the South Bronx, one of the poorest neighborhoods in New York City. So there's a huge disparity. We have no PTA, so there's no voice, there's no parent voice. And many of the problems, or one of the largest problems we face in these type of communities, is lack of parental involvement. And so when you think about the disparity, and you think about how on one end you have parents that are like, no, we want this curriculum, we want to include this, we want to make sure our children have chess and Tai Chi, and then on the other hand, you have schools where the kids don't even know what that is. And so and this is within New York City, which is one of the largest school systems. And as a parent and as a school leader, I see it firsthand. And so I'm chipping away at it bit by bit on my end within my building, but there needs to be more people like me seeing it and with this lens, rather than just kind of tucking it in and saying, well, if it doesn't apply to me, then it doesn't really matter at this moment. And so I think, again, going back to the bigger issue is, what are the leaders doing? because the parents can also, okay, let me go back. The parents have a huge voice, but the school leaders also have a responsibility to respond to that voice. And I think the bigger issue is in some areas, there is no voice. And so it just gets swept under the rug. And in some places there's voice, and you can tell there's voice. You can tell by just walking into the building. You can tell by the diversity in the classroom. You can tell by the diversity in the curriculum. You can tell by the way the teachers approach the children. And you can tell by the mannerisms. We also have a large African population. And so going back to what was mentioned earlier, the way they respond culturally, man versus woman, eye contact, and just small things, just body language and mannerisms. If you haven't had these conversations with your staff, they might feel offended. They might feel disrespected, whereas it's not even that. This is their culture. And so it is about understanding the population that you serve, because at the end of the day, we're here to serve a population. We're here to serve our children. And so when you come with that mindset, you have to ask yourself, how can I best serve this population? And the first is getting to know them, getting to know who you're serving. Because once you figure out who you're serving, then it makes it a lot easier. It makes it a lot easier for you to really enforce inclusivity amongst the students within the building.
Serene, you're on mute.
Thank you. I got too excited over here. I got way too excited. Thank you so much, Dr. Sivers, because that is what it's about, right? And so to encapsulate this discussion, which we could have probably for another hour, to be really honest with you, but I want to be very, very respectful of everyone's time. We're already 2 minutes over, but I want to give our panelists the opportunity to give you one thing that you can do to advance this discussion with your educators in 30 seconds or less. And then what we're going to do as we wrap up this discussion, we will send you some tools that you can use to advance the discussion on your own, and also ask you to join us for our next discussion where we're talking about school choice. Do you go for cultural alignment or a good school? And it's unfortunate we have to have that conversation, but that is the reality. And so for my panelists, if there was one thing, one piece of information that our parents, our caregivers can leave in order to advance this discussion, what would it be?
I would say one thing is use your resources that you have as far as technology. Send an email to the school principal and ask them how are they implementing culturally relevant pedagogy in their schools. They are required to answer, I believe, within 48 hours. Okay, so you send an email and you do not go with just letting them copy and paste something from the internet, but you want to know specifically, you're going to ask specifically, what are you doing to ensure that your teachers are allowing all students of any diversity feel as if they are connected to the learning experience in their classroom. And so that's the one piece of advice I could give.
Thank you, Candace. Jennifer?
Serene, can I skew the question just from the perspective of a teacher? So if educators, you don't mind, is that okay? I think that we know there's so much work that needs to happen in all schools across our country. I think it's a really great way to get people involved by simply saying, hey, did you know this about this group of our kids? Did you know this? Did you know about our children from Honduras and what they had to endure? Hey, are you interested in doing a book club? I just read this great book and I got it approved for credit. Let's read this book together and talk about it. I mean, just put these little bits out there, because that is leadership. That is teacher leadership right there that will directly impact children in a positive way. So I think that while parents have their avenues, I think a way for a teacher to try and chip away at this is to just start something up on their own. And I think a book club is a great way to do it.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm so sorry that we went over. I am very respectful of your time, but I did not want to stop the discussion because I thought that there were some really great pieces of information that you could use. Again, join us next month. We'll send information out on that. The discussion will be about school choice, and some of the challenges that we have to face when we have to make those tough decisions. Sending you all love and peace. Thank you so much. Keep pushing the envelope for your children. And thank you so much for being part of this really important discussion. Resources to follow. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.